The lavender stems lay broken, releasing a heady fragrance into the humid air. The gardener froze mid-step, his dirt-stained gloves suspended above the soil. From beyond the hedgerow came a sharp click, crisp as breaking ice. He turned his head slowly, brim shadowing his eyes, lips tightening as if to hold back words. A monarch butterfly landed on a poppy, wings trembling like a pulse. The click came again, closer this time, deliberate and unhurried. His breath hitched, the scent of rain riding the shifting wind. Through the leaves, a figure emerged, camera raised, lens glinting in the amber light. Neither spoke. The bees droned on, weaving between blossoms. The moment held, stretched thin, and in it hung a question neither dared ask. The woman's camera lowered, her eyes narrowing as she studied him through the gaps in the leaves. The gardener straightened, brushing soil from his gloves with deliberate care. She said softly, "You planted more this year." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "They needed space," he replied. The air hung heavy between them, charged with an unspoken history neither wanted to name. Faint buzz of insects filled the silence, each sound sharper than it should have been. Somewhere a petal dropped from a bloom and spun lazily to the ground. The wind shifted again, carrying the smell of wet earth and a storm not yet arrived. A distant rumble of thunder rolled over the hills. The gardener glanced skyward, his face briefly illuminated by a shaft of fading sunlight. "Rain will come," he murmured, half to himself. She adjusted her grip on the camera, eyes never leaving his face. "That's when they'll come too," she said, almost smiling. His brows furrowed, the faintest flicker of curiosity breaking his guarded stance. The petals of the nearest sunflower quivered, catching the last light before the clouds claimed it. Between them, the untrampled blooms swayed, tall and unafraid. The first cool drop struck the brim of his hat. Another landed on her camera lens, leaving a perfect bead of water. "You knew I'd be here," she said, tilting her head as though it were a challenge. His lips curved in something not quite a smile. "I knew someone would be," he answered. Rain began in earnest, drumming on leaves, softening the edges of the world. The air smelled of ozone and crushed petals. They stood in the downpour, unmoving, each locked in the quiet war of watching. Water traced lines down his weathered cheeks, mingling with the soil on his skin. Her camera rose once more, but this time the shutter was slow, deliberate. A bird darted between them, feathers slick with rain, vanishing into the hedgerow. Somewhere beyond, the world waited, but for now, only the rain spoke. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving the garden dripping and glistening in the pale light of a clearing sky. The gardener knelt among the soaked blooms, water beading on his gloves as he brushed soil from the roots of a newly planted row. The photographer crouched several steps away, her lens trained not on the flowers, but on the quiet determination in his movements. "Why these?" she asked, voice soft but insistent. He didn't look up. "They bring what others can't," he murmured. A robin hopped close, unafraid, tilting its head toward the glistening petals. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of life returned. The photographer shifted position, kneeling until the wet soil seeped into her jeans. "You're not doing this for beauty," she said, tilting the camera for a different angle. He glanced up briefly, rain still dripping from the brim of his hat. "Beauty's a side effect," he replied. The robin flitted away, replaced by a flash of orange and black as a butterfly returned. She followed it with her lens, tracking its slow, deliberate dance from bloom to bloom. The air was warm now, the storm's chill replaced by the breath of summer. He stood slowly, stretching his back, and looked toward the far end of the garden, where the fence gave way to open meadow. "They'll come through there," he said quietly. She lowered her camera, following his gaze. The meadow shimmered with lingering mist, every blade of grass tipped in silver. Somewhere beyond the veil, a shadow moved, too large for a bird, too graceful for a stray dog. Her breath caught, and without speaking, she began to raise the camera again. The figure in the mist resolved into a deer, antlers heavy with droplets, eyes bright with quiet curiosity. It stepped forward, hooves silent in the wet grass, pausing at the fence line. The gardener remained still, every muscle holding the moment in place. She whispered, "They trust you." He gave no answer, but the smallest flicker of a smile touched his face. The deer bent its head toward the blooms, drawing in their scent. The shutter clicked once, then again, capturing the way the deer's breath curled into the air. The gardener finally spoke. "They come because no one else plants for them." She lowered the camera, meeting his eyes with something between respect and disbelief. The deer turned, vanishing into the mist as if it had never been there. Only the flowers remained, heavy with rain, defiant in their color against the fading gray. Morning broke with a pale gold light spilling over the garden, dew clinging to every surface. The gardener moved silently among the flowers, trimming damaged stems from the storm's weight. The photographer stood near the fence, camera slung but eyes alert. "It's not just deer," she said quietly. He glanced up, brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" A rustle came from the meadow, deeper than the gentle wind. She raised her camera again, her breath steady. A shape began to form at the edge of the trees. The fox emerged, coat slick with dew, eyes bright and unblinking. It moved with the slow confidence of something that belonged. The gardener froze mid-cut, the small shears hovering in his hand. The photographer tracked the fox every step through her lens. "They're coming closer," she murmured. He exhaled, a sound more like resignation than surprise. The fox paused at the edge of the flowers, nose twitching in the cool air. The ox lowered its head, brushing its whiskers against a cluster of blossoms. The gardener stepped forward instinctively, but the photographer's sharp whisper halted him. "Don't," she said. "This is the shot." He hesitated, watching as the animal's fur caught the morning light in streaks of copper and gold. A bee drifted past, and the fox's ear twitched in response. The air was heavy with the scent of wet soil and blooming petals. The shutter clicked in rapid succession, the sound crisp against the hush of the morning. The gardener's eyes shifted from the fox to the woman, a shadow of understanding settling in his gaze. "This isn't just for you," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but the faintest curve of a smile played at her lips. The fox lingered for a moment longer, then slipped back toward the meadow, vanishing into the mist. She lowered the camera, reviewing the images with quick, practiced swipes. "They'll want this," she said under her breath. He took a step closer. "Who's they?" Her eyes met his, unflinching. "People who need to see what's here." The gardener's jaw tightened. The meadow lay quiet now, but the air felt charged, as if something larger than the two of them had begun to stir. The gardener wiped his palms against his trousers, leaving faint streaks of damp soil on the fabric. His gaze stayed fixed on her, sharp yet unreadable. "You're not here for the flowers," he said. The air between them was cool, still, as if the garden itself was listening. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a worn envelope. Its edges were frayed, the paper soft from many hands. Without a word, she held it toward him. He hesitated, then took it, the weight in his hand far greater than paper should hold. The National Geographic emblem gleamed faintly in the morning light, stamped in gold. His eyes moved over the printed words, each one carving deeper into him. When he looked up, his voice was tight. "They sent you." It was not a question. She nodded, her tone calm but deliberate. "They've been following your work. How you turned this into a sanctuary." He stepped back as though the words had physical weight. "It's not for them. It's for what lives here." The wind stirred, scattering a few petals that landed between them like fallen fragments of a conversation. She watched him closely, seeing the way his grip on the letter tightened, the edges curling under his fingers. Her voice softened. "They want to see it." He turned his head slightly, eyes moving over the blooms, as if counting what might be lost. Her next words cut the air. "They want to feature you, not just the garden, you." His jaw tightened, deepening the lines etched by years of weather and work. "I'm not the story," he said flatly. Before she could answer, a sound broke through the stillness, the measured rustle of something moving in the hedgerow. They both turned. Out from the misted meadow stepped the deer, its antlers beaded with droplets. Behind it came the fox, its coat a flare of copper against the green, and two hares that hopped cautiously into view. It was as if the garden itself had called them forward. The animals moved among the flowers with calm precision, bending heads to sniff blossoms, ears twitching at distant sounds. She lifted her camera, but didn't press the shutter. "This is why they sent me," she whispered. His reply was almost lost to the breeze. "And this is why I didn't want them to know." His stance was rigid, but his eyes softened at the sight of the fox nosing a cluster of marigolds. The moment felt suspended, held in fragile balance between pride and fear. She lowered the camera fully. If the world saw this, they'd fight to protect it. His voice came without hesitation. Or they'd come to take it. The deer raised its head, ears flicking, and began to move toward the meadow. The others followed, slipping into the mist one by one. She watched them vanish until only the flowers remained, bright against the muted gray. He turned away, folding the letter and sliding it into his pocket. The garden's colors seemed to deepen in the quiet, as if reclaiming what had been briefly given away. The wind rolled through the garden with a low hum, bending stalks of hollyhock and shaking beads of water from their petals. He stood anchored, boots firm in the softened soil, staring at her with an expression too controlled to be calm. "You'll publish it anyway," he said. Each word weighted. She shook her head slowly, eyes searching his face for some crack in the wall he had built. "Not without your word." He studied her, gaze sharp, reading every flicker in her features. A bee traced lazy circles between them, before disappearing into the deep heart of a sunflower. Above, clouds were pulling over the sun like a veil, sharpening the coolness in the air. She gripped the camera at her side, as if it were heavier than its frame allowed, the strap swaying slightly in the breeze. Between them lay not just a patch of wet grass, but the line that neither had dared cross until now. Her voice cracked, a splinter of truth breaking through her careful tone. "I can't protect it alone." His reply was sharp, final. "Then let it be." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It throbbed, heavy with the weight of opposing convictions. A sudden rustle in the hedgerow drew their eyes. From the tangle of green, a family of fox kits emerged, their small bodies damp and bright-eyed. They blinked at the light before padding onto the open grass, curiosity guiding each tiny step. She lifted her camera on instinct, the lens glinting faintly as it caught the muted light. His sharp intake of breath cut through the moment like a blade. She froze, hand hovering over the shutter as the unspoken warning hung between them. "They're the reason," she whispered, her voice carrying a fragile urgency. His reply was low but resolute. "And they're the risk." The kits moved along the garden's edge, their paws pressing tiny prints into the dark soil. One nosed a fallen petal, its fur catching the faintest glint of light. The air between them seemed ready to shatter, like glass drawn too tight. She lowered her camera slowly, but her eyes betrayed her. They followed every twitch of the fox's ears, every quick flick of their tails. He saw the longing in her gaze and knew that to her, this wasn't just a photograph, it was proof. The first drops of rain splashed against the leaves, sending the fox kits darting back toward the hedgerow in a blur of russet and white. He stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the sodden earth, voice a low thread beneath the patter of rain. "Once it's out there, you can't take it back." Her gaze held his, unflinching despite the storm gathering above them. "And if it's hidden, you can't save it." The rain thickened, streaking their faces and softening the edges of the world. Between them, the ground seemed smaller than it had ever been, but the distance felt impossibly wide. Thunder cracked in the distance, rolling over the hills and sending a startled flock of birds into the sky. She took a step back, rain streaming down her hair and into the collar of her jacket, her camera clutched to her chest like a shield. He turned away without a word, disappearing into the deeper tangle of blooms, his outline fading with each step into the curtain of rain. The flowers swayed wildly, their stems bowing under the combined weight of wind and water. The meadow beyond blurred into a wash of gray and green. She stood alone, her breath loud in her ears, wondering if this was an ending, or simply the cost of standing on the edge of two truths. By late afternoon, the rain had eased into a mist so fine it seemed to hang in the air like a held breath. The garden was darker now, the light filtering through a pale veil of cloud. The gardener walked slowly, boots pressing into soft rain-fed soil that released the scent of earth with each step. His hands worked with quiet precision, adjusting the position of a stem here, removing a damaged leaf there. Far off at the fence she stood still, her silhouette softened by the haze. The camera at her side swung gently, untouched. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things they hadn't said, full of the weight of what both had chosen to protect. Somewhere in the distance, a single bird called, the sound clear in the damp air. He knelt beside a lavender patch beaten low by rain, cupping the stems in his gloved hands and propping them gently upright. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. She approached, her steps soft, the damp ground swallowing any sound. "You'll lose them if you don't share this," she said, her voice low. He didn't look up. "And I'll lose them faster if I do." The mist thickened, turning the garden edges into soft, blurred shapes. The words seemed to hang in the air, unmoving, as if even the breeze hesitated. A sudden rush of air overhead drew their eyes upward. A flock of starlings wheeled and twisted in the pale sky, moving as one body. She raised her camera, framing the flock in her lens, but didn't take the shot. Instead, she lowered it, a faint, almost wistful smile brushing her lips. "Not every moment needs capturing," he said, his eyes following the shifting shapes. She kept her gaze upward. "Some moments capture you." The wind carried their words away, leaving only the rustle of wings above. They walked toward the hedgerow in step, the wet ground pressing quietly under their boots. The air was cool, rich with the smell of damp leaves. Through the green weave of branches, the meadow shimmered faintly under the waning light. In the distance, the faint outline of a deer appeared, standing still as stone. She glanced at him, but his gaze never left the animal. The deer turned, disappearing into the shadows without a sound, as if it had been nothing but a shared thought. They stopped at the fence. She rested her hands on the wet wood, feeling the rough grain bite into her skin. "I'll hold the story," she said finally, her voice carrying both promise and surrender. He nodded once, the movement small but heavy with meaning. The mist was lifting now, revealing the garden's colors, vivid yet softened, as though the world wasn't ready to return in full. For the first time that day his shoulders eased, but his eyes still searched the horizon as though expecting something to return. Between them, the quiet felt earned. The first light of dawn came gently, spilling across the garden like honey poured over velvet. Each petal seemed to catch the glow, holding it for a moment before releasing it back to the air. The rain from the night before had washed away every trace of yesterday's tension, yet it clung in spirit, hovering in the cool damp air like an unspoken word. The gardener stepped slowly between the rows, his boots pressing into the softened earth with a quiet suction. He bent to brush beads of dew from a drooping lily, his gloved fingertips grazing the curve of the bloom, as though it might bruise from too much care. He paused often, his gaze sweeping not just over the flowers but beyond them, the fence, the meadow, the line of trees in the distance. There was no wildlife in sight this morning, but it did not feel like absence. It felt like anticipation. The female photographer stood at the fence, her camera nowhere to be seen, her hands resting on the weathered rail. She watched him without calling out, the chill of the wood beneath her palms grounding her. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the leaves and the soft crunch of his boots as he moved. A pale mist clung low to the ground, curling like smoke between the flowers. When he glanced her way, it was brief, a single flicker before his attention returned to the lilies. They had made no promises the night before, yet both seemed to be keeping one. She moved along the fence line with the patience of someone trying to memorize a place in its entirety. Her fingertips slid over the rails, feeling every groove and splinter worn into the wood by years of weather. The damp seeped into her skin, carrying the scent of moss and rain-aged timber. The garden unfolded before her in slow layers, the tall spikes of delphinium swaying ever so slightly in the morning breeze, the broad sunflower heads bending toward the rising sun, the hidden tangle of wild herbs pushing between the orderly rows. She traced the edge of the fence until she reached a corner post, where ivy climbed in dark green spirals. Her gaze wandered past the blooms, searching the meadow for movement, but there was only the shifting mist. He straightened from his work and saw her there, framed in that soft gold light, but said nothing. There was no urgency now, no need to interrupt the quiet arrangement they had fallen into. The stillness between them was heavier than it had been the day before, but its weight no longer felt like conflict. It felt like the weight of what they both carried, but would not name. At the far edge of the garden, she came upon a cluster of wildflowers, growing where they had no permission to be, between cracks in the old stone path that led to the shed. Their petals were small but unyielding, opening fully to the morning despite the chill. She knelt, brushing her fingertips lightly over one of the stems, feeling the delicate tension in its thin frame. "Some things survive without help," she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. He did not move from where he stood, but his reply was immediate, carried on the same still air. "And some only survive because someone cared." Her eyes remained on the flowers, but her lips parted as if to answer. Instead, she traced the edge of a petal with a single fingertip, committing its shape to memory. Around her the light shifted, catching motes of water in the air so they glimmered briefly like stars before disappearing again. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rustle suggested movement in the meadow, but it faded as quickly as it came. She rose from her crouch and walked toward him, each step deliberate, as though crossing an invisible threshold. He remained still, watching her approach, his shadow stretching long behind him in the morning light. When she stopped, they were a breath apart, close enough for the faint scent of earth and crushed herbs to rise between them. "I won't tell them," she said, the words leaving her like a final exhale. His eyes searched hers for any trace of deceit, but all he found was quiet resolve. "Then you'll keep the only thing worth keeping," he replied. The words were not triumphant nor even grateful. They were an acknowledgement of something larger than both of them. Neither smiled, for smiles would have broken the gravity of that moment. Behind them, the garden was alive with color, yet the space between them felt suspended, untouched by the bloom or the light. It was an agreement that did not need signatures, only silence. She turned then, her boots brushing against the damp grass as she took the path toward the meadow. The rising sun caught her hair, setting it briefly aflame in copper and gold. He did not follow, only watched as she moved further into the light. Her steps slowed once as if she might turn back, but she didn't. The meadow opened ahead of her, bright and endless, the mist thinning with each pace she took. The sound of her movement grew softer until it was gone, swallowed by the hum of morning insects and the whisper of wind in the grass. Alone now, he looked over the garden as if seeing it anew, each plant a testament to the years he had spent here. His lips moved in words, not meant for another human ear. "They'll never know you saved them." The breeze shifted, bending the tallest blooms and carrying his words into the air. The flowers swayed, as though in agreement, their colors rich against the softening sky. Whatever had passed between them would remain here, rooted in soil and silence.